We think of America's first major war as the Revolution, fought for independence. But nearly 150 years earlier, a different kind of war was fought, not for independence, but for existence. It climaxed before dawn on May 26, 1637, when a thriving Pequot village was turned into a fiery trap in under an hour. This was the Mystic Massacre, an act of annihilation that set a terrifying precedent for centuries of conflict to come. This is the story of the Pequot War. To understand a moment of such horror, we need to zoom out. The American story is often told through its famous wars against clear enemies, the Revolution, the World Wars. But before all of them, there was another kind of conflict, waged between 1636 and 1638. It wasn't fought on neat battle lines, but in forests and swamps, a desperate struggle for the future of a continent. On one side were the fledgling English colonies of New England, driven by religious fervor and an insatiable hunger for land. On the other, the region's most powerful Native American tribe, the Pequot, who controlled the trade, the territory, and the power. It was a collision of ambitions where the stakes weren't just profit, but survival itself. At the heart of this conflict is the Mystic Massacre, a name that still carries the weight of its horror. But this was never a simple clash of cultures. It was a multi-sided battle for political and economic supremacy, where loyalties shifted like the coastal winds. The proud Pequot, the ambitious English, and other native tribes like the Mohegan and Narragansett were all caught in a web of shifting alliances, forced to make impossible choices. To understand the Pequot War is to get to the raw, often brutal foundations of America itself. To truly comprehend the explosion of violence that would define this era, you have to understand the world that existed before it, a world held in a delicate and increasingly precarious balance. In the early 1600s, the land we now call southeastern Connecticut was far from an empty wilderness. It was a vibrant, bustling network of villages, trade routes, and diplomatic connections, covering roughly 250 square miles. This entire domain was under the dominion of a single, formidable power, the Pequot. Their very name, sometimes translated as the Destroyers, was a clear reflection of the profound respect and fear they commanded among all their neighbors. They were not a scattered collection of bands, but a highly organized political and military force. Through a sophisticated combination of diplomacy, coercion, and, when necessary, warfare, they had built a vast tributary confederacy. Smaller tribes in the region paid homage to them, acknowledging their supremacy and securing their protection in a complex web of power. Even after waves of European diseases tragically swept through the region and reduced their overall numbers, the Pequot's robust social structure allowed them to endure and remain the truly significant force in the region. The bedrock of Pequot power was their strategic and geographic control over the era's two most valuable commodities, furs from the interior and wampum from the coast. Wampum, intricate, cylindrical purple and white beads painstakingly crafted from quahog and whelk shells, was far more than simple decoration. It was a sacred cultural medium used to record tribal histories and to solemnize treaties, where specific patterns and colors conveyed deep, complex meanings. At the same time, it functioned as a universally accepted form of currency among both native and European traders. The Pequot dominated the coastlines where the specific shells needed for wampum were found, granting them immense economic leverage. Think of their position as controlling both the central bank and the main oil supply of its day. This unique advantage allowed them to operate as the essential middlemen in all regional trade. No goods could flow from the coast to the interior, and no furs could come out without their consent. This strategic position made them immensely wealthy and powerful, cementing their dominance over all other tribes. Into this intricate world of native power and politics came new players on tall ships, altering the balance forever. First were the Dutch, who by 1622 had established a trading post on the Connecticut River. Recognizing where the power lay, they forged a close and exclusive alliance with the Pequot, creating a powerful Dutch-Pequot monopoly over the lucrative fur trade. The Dutch wanted beaver pelts to send back to Europe, and the Pequot, controlling access to the inland hunting grounds, could provide them in abundance. For a full decade, This mutually beneficial arrangement reinforced Pequot dominance, making them even richer and more influential. But this stable, Pequot-centric balance was shattered in the early 1630s with the mass arrival of English Puritans who began pouring into the Connecticut River Valley. The English saw the valley not just as a trade route, but as fertile ground for new permanent settlements. They were fundamentally land-hungry, and they operated under a potent legal and religious concept known as vacuum domicilium. This was the belief that any land not improved in the European style, meaning fenced, farmed, and built upon with permanent structures, was essentially empty, a vacuum, and therefore free for the taking. This idea was in direct, catastrophic opposition to native conceptions of land, which was seen as a shared resource for hunting and seasonal use, not a commodity to be owned and divided. Crucially, the English had absolutely no interest in honoring the exclusive trade relationship between the Pequot and the Dutch. They wanted in, and they were more than willing to break the established order to get it. The English quickly discovered they had allies of convenience in the region. They found willing partners in tribes that had long resented the Pequot's authority and were eager to see them humbled. Chief among these were the Mohegan, led by the shrewd and ambitious Sachem Uncas. Once a part of the Pequot Confederation, Uncas harbored a deep personal and political rivalry with the Pequot Grand Sachem Sassacus. He saw an alliance with the militarily powerful English as his clearest and perhaps only path to breaking away from Pequot control and establishing his own tribe's independence and prominence. Likewise, the powerful Narragansett tribe to the east, longtime enemies and rivals of the Pequot, viewed the English arrival as a golden opportunity. For years they had been locked in a struggle with the Pequot for regional supremacy. The English, with their muskets and cannons, represented a chance to decisively shift that balance of power in their favor. The stage was thus set, not for a simple English versus native war, but a far more complex native versus native power struggle, with the English acting as a powerful and disruptive new piece on the board. The simmering pot of rivalries, economic competition, and cultural misunderstanding soon boiled over into open violence. The first major catalyst came in 1634, when an English trader named John Stone, a man described even by his own Puritan contemporaries as a disreputable privateer and outright pirate, was killed on the Connecticut River. The incident was not unprovoked. It was rooted in a clear cycle of retribution. Shortly before, Dutch traders had kidnapped and killed the principal Pequot Sachem, and Stone's death was a retaliatory strike, further complicated by the fact that Stone himself had kidnapped several native people just before he was killed. From the Pequot perspective, their actions were justified according to the norms of regional justice, but to the English, the death of any Englishman at native hands, regardless of the circumstances, was an intolerable affront to their honor and authority. Tensions escalated dramatically 2 years later, in July 1636, with the murder of another, more reputable English trader, John Oldham, on Block Island. Though the available evidence suggested the killers were from a local tribe tributary to the Narragansett, not the Pequot, the English authorities in the Massachusetts Bay Colony chose to place the blame squarely on the Pequot. For the hardline colonial leaders, the specific facts of the case were irrelevant. Oldham's death was the pretext they had been waiting for, a justification to wage a war of conquest, break the Pequot Nation, and seize their valuable land once and for all. The response from Massachusetts was swift, decisive, and brutal. An incensed Governor Henry Vane dispatched a force of 90 men under the command of John Endicott with chillingly specific orders: sail to Block Island, kill every man, and capture the women and children for enslavement. Then proceed to the Pequot mainland and demand the surrender of Oldham's alleged killers and a massive, punitive payment in wampum. In August 1636, Endicott's expedition carried out its punitive mission. They found the Block Island villages mostly empty, as the inhabitants had fled, so they burned them to the ground, methodically destroying their winter corn stores in an act aimed at starvation. Endicott's forces then sailed to Pequot territory, and after their impossible demands were predictably refused, his men again resorted to fire, burning a village before sailing back to Boston, satisfied. To the English, this was a successful show of force, a lesson properly administered. To the Pequot, it was an unprovoked, dishonorable, and outrageous act of war. Their culture, their honor, and their very survival demanded retaliation. Throughout the fall and winter of 1636, Pequot warriors laid siege to the English outpost at Fort Saybrook and conducted a series of devastating raids on outlying colonial settlements along the Connecticut River. Their hit-and-run tactics, honed by generations of forest warfare, proved far superior to the conventional methods of the English soldiers. Dozens of colonists were killed, and life on the frontier became a state of constant terror. But the Pequot's military success only hardened the colonists' resolve. Fear and outrage spread like wildfire through the colonies. The Pequot were no longer just a commercial rival. They were now seen as a mortal threat to English existence in the region, an obstacle that had to be utterly and permanently removed. The point of no return had been crossed. The stage was set for a new, more terrifying phase of the conflict. As the last snows of a bitter winter melted away in the spring of 1637, they revealed a landscape gripped by fear. A palpable dread hung over the fledgling English colonies of Hartford and their neighbors. The Pequot had proven to be masters of the forest, their raids relentless and utterly terrifying. Life became a suffocating ordeal. Every shadow at the edge of a cultivated field, every rustle in the dark woods beyond the palisade walls, brought with it the chilling fear of a swift and violent attack. Farmers began carrying their heavy muskets into the fields to plow, their eyes constantly scanning the tree line. Families barricaded their doors at night, the psychological toll of this siege-like existence mounting with each passing day. The colonists at Hartford, having endured months of being picked off one by one, came to a grim and unavoidable conclusion. A defensive war was a losing strategy. It was a slow, agonizing death by 1,000 cuts, and it was bleeding the colony dry of both life and morale. On May 1st, 1637, the General Court of the Connecticut colony made a fateful decision, one that would change the course of American history. They formally declared an offensive war against the Pequot Nation. The goal was no longer to repel, to defend, or to punish. It was to eliminate. The man chosen to lead this grim endeavor was Captain John Mason. He was not a farmer or a preacher reluctantly playing soldier for the season. He was a professional, a hardened veteran of Europe's brutal and bloody religious wars in the Low Countries. His military education had been forged in a crucible where annihilation was a common tactic, and mass civilian casualties were an accepted part of siege warfare. Mason was a pragmatic and utterly ruthless tactician, a man who saw the world in terms of objectives and obstacles, of victory and defeat. He was perfectly, almost terrifyingly, suited for the task the colonies now demanded: the total destruction of an enemy. Under his command, a militia of 90 Englishmen was raised. They were joined by a force of some 70 Mohegan warriors, led by the shrewd and ambitious Sachemunkus, who savored this long-awaited opportunity to dethrone his Pequot rivals and seize power for himself. The initial plan, hatched in Hartford, was conventional, even predictable. It called for a direct assault by water, sailing down the Connecticut River and then west along the coast to strike the primary Pequot fortifications where the Grand Sachem Sassacus himself resided. It was the most logical course of action, and therefore the most obvious. But upon reaching the English outpost at Fort Saybrook, the entire calculus of the war changed. There, Mason's small force was reinforced by Captain John Underhill and his 20 men from Massachusetts Bay. And it was there, within the fort's wooden walls, that Mason unveiled a radical and deceptive new strategy that stunned his subordinates. He was a cunning man, well versed in the art of misdirection, and he recognized that a frontal assault was exactly what the powerful and strategically minded Sassacus would anticipate. A direct attack invited high casualties and could easily end in a catastrophic failure against the Pequot's formidable defenses. So he proposed a high-stakes gamble, a piece of military theater designed to deceive and disorient his enemy completely. He would not sail his fleet west toward the Pequot forts. Instead, he would sail his 3 small ships east in the opposite direction, past the mouth of the Thames River and completely beyond Pequot territory, making it appear as if he were retreating or heading for Massachusetts Bay. He would then land his forces in Narragansett Bay, deep in the territory of the Pequot's traditional enemies. From there, He would lead his army on a grueling overland march from the east, striking the Pequot from their unguarded rear, a direction from which no attack was ever expected. The proposal was met with shock and immediate resistance. Some of Mason's own men, already intimidated by the Pequot's reputation, protested vehemently. They argued the plan was far too reckless, that marching through dozens of miles of unfamiliar, hostile territory would leave them exposed, exhausted, and vulnerable to ambush. But Mason's resolve was ironclad. His experiences in Europe had taught him that victory often belonged not to the strongest, but to the most audacious. He overruled all objections. Making land, Mason and Uncas entered into a tense and critical parley with the powerful Narragansett sachems. Though sworn enemies of the Pequot, the Narragansett were deeply wary of this new English alliance. They looked at Mason's small, pale-faced company of 90 men and openly scoffed, their skepticism plain to see. They warned Mason that his Pequot enemies were great captains and men skillful in war, and that his force was too meager to challenge the might of the Pequot Nation. They were not wrong to be doubtful, but the English had an ace in the hole, the Puritan outcast and founder of Rhode Island, Roger Williams. Having been banished from Massachusetts for his dissenting religious views, Williams had forged a deep and genuinely trusting relationship with the Narragansett. He respected their culture and spoke their language. His crucial diplomatic intervention, vouching for the English and persuading the sachems of their resolve, tipped the scales. The Narragansett, sensing a historic opportunity to shatter their powerful rivals once and for all, finally agreed to the alliance, adding several hundred of their own warriors to Mason's growing and now formidable army. The march was grueling. A combined force of English, Mohegan, and Narragansett trudged through dense forests and murky swamps, a tense and fragile coalition moving toward a shared enemy. Finally, on the evening of May 25th, they arrived, exhausted and soaked with sweat, on the hills overlooking the Mystic River. English scouts and their native guides slipped through the encroaching darkness and returned with critical intelligence. The target below was not, as they had initially hoped, the main fortress of Sassacus, where the bulk of the Pequot fighting force was stationed. It was a secondary palisaded village, but more importantly, the scouts reported it was primarily occupied by non-combatants, women, children, and the elderly. The Pequot warriors, confident in their defenses and expecting any potential attack to come from the sea to the west, were away with Sassacus. For any other commander, in any other kind of war, this might have been a reason to pause, to reconsider, to change the target. But this intelligence did not give Captain John Mason a moment's pause. In his cold, unflinching calculus of war, this softer target was not a liability. It was an advantage. His objective was not to win a conventional battle against warriors, it was to break the Pequot's will to exist. He would terrorize them into submission, and the slaughter of their families was the most effective way to do it. The attack was set for the blackest hours before dawn. Under the cover of a disorienting darkness, Mason's forces crept silently down the hill and surrounded the sleeping village. They split into two companies, one led by Mason, the other by Underhill, to block the only two entrances to the wooden palisade. The stillness of the night was suddenly and violently shattered, not by a musket shot, but by the frantic, terrified barking of a village dog. A moment later, a lone Pequot sentinel on the wall spotted the dark shapes moving in the gloom and screamed the desperate, panicked warning. "Oh, Wanux! Oh, Wanux! Englishmen! Englishmen!" The cry was a death knell. The element of surprise was gone. Mason gave the immediate order to charge. The English soldiers stormed the two entrances, firing volleys from their matchlock muskets directly into the packed wigwams. But the Pequot, violently shaken from their sleep, mounted a defense of shocking and desperate ferocity. Warriors grabbed their bows and clubs and met the English in the narrow, claustrophobic alleys between the homes, turning the initial assault into a chaotic, hand-to-hand struggle in the dark. For a moment, the English attack bogged down, their advance halted by the sheer fury of the defenders. The outcome hung precariously in the balance, lost in the bloody darkness of the enclosed village. It was then that Captain Mason, his neat plan for a swift, overwhelming victory unraveling in the chaos, made the single, infamous decision that would forever define the Pequot War. He realized that winning this fight by the sword would be costly, slow, and uncertain. So he abandoned the conventions of a battle entirely and chose annihilation instead. "We must burn them," he bellowed over the din of the fight. He grabbed a firebrand from a nearby hearth and thrust it with his own hands against the dry, woven mat wall of a wigwam. Across the enclosure, Captain Underhill saw his commander's signal and did the same, lighting another home. Helped by a strong, dry northeasterly wind, the flames didn't just catch, they exploded. Fire leaped from one wigwam to the next with horrifying, unnatural speed. In a matter of seconds, the entire village was transformed into an inescapable inferno. The tall, strong wooden palisade, built to protect the inhabitants from attack, instantly became the walls of a roaring furnace, trapping everyone inside. What followed was not a battle. It was a methodical, systematic slaughter. As hundreds of terrified Pequot, men, women, and children, poured out of the burning longhouses to escape the scorching flames and suffocating smoke, they were met by a solid ring of English soldiers. The colonists stood shoulder to shoulder, their muskets leveled, firing relentlessly into the panicked crowds. There was no escape. Mason's Mohegan and Narragansett allies had formed a wider, outer perimeter, tasked with cutting down any who somehow, miraculously, slipped past the English line. The accounts written by the English themselves paint a horrifying picture of the scene. Captain John Underhill would later describe the great and doleful sight of so many souls lie gasping on the ground. Plymouth Governor William Bradford, writing from a safe distance, described it with a chilling religious satisfaction. He called it a fearful sight to see them thus frying in the fire, and noted that the victorious colonists gave praise to God for delivering their enemies into their hands. But the Narragansett warriors, who had joined the alliance to fight the Pequot warriors in an honorable contest of strength, were left utterly appalled by what they were witnessing. This was not war as they understood it. Their own traditions of warfare were built on limiting casualties, demonstrating individual bravery, and taking captives who could be adopted into the tribe to replace losses. This indiscriminate, wholesale slaughter of non-combatants was a form of unrestrained brutality they had never before witnessed. Staring at the roaring flames and the systematic carnage, they cried out to the English that this way of war was "Mack it, it is evil." It was, they said in horror, too furious and slays too many men. In less than a single hour, it was all over. The fires began to die down, revealing a scene of almost unimaginable horror under the first light of dawn. Of the estimated 400 to 700 Pequot who had been sleeping peacefully in the village just an hour before, only a handful managed to escape into the surrounding woods. In stark contrast, the English had lost only 2 men. The Mystic Massacre was more than a lopsided victory. It was a statement. It was the catastrophic turning point of the war, an act of calculated terror that shattered not just the Pequot's military capacity, but their very spirit. A terrifying message had been sent to every native person in New England. This is how the English wage war. The fire at Mystic was a funeral pyre for a village, but its smoke signaled the beginning of the end for the entire Pequot Nation. The news of the massacre, the sheer speed, totality, and horror of it, struck the Grand Sachem, Sassacus, and his remaining warriors with a force beyond comprehension. Their military strategy, their understanding of warfare, their very worldview had been shattered in a single hour. Faced with an enemy who waged war on women and children, the remaining Pequot communities made a desperate, agonizing decision. They would abandon their ancestral homeland. In a final tragic act of self-determination, they set fire to their own remaining villages and fortifications, destroying the very symbols of their power so they could not be possessed by the English. They became refugees, a people without a country, fleeing westward in scattered bands with the desperate hope of finding sanctuary among the Mohawk tribes in what is now New York. But there would be no safe harbor, no escape from the colonists' wrath. The English, emboldened by their victory and determined to finish the job, immediately organized a relentless manhunt. Along with their Mohegan and Narragansett allies, who were now bound to the English cause, they scoured the forests and coastlines, hunting down the fleeing Pequot survivors like animals. The final bloody chapter of the war unfolded in July 1637, near present-day Fairfield. Their English forces tracked and cornered a large group of several hundred Pequot, trapping them in a dense, muddy swamp. This great swamp fight was not a battle, but a slow, suffocating siege. Surrounded and with no hope of escape, the Pequot were given a grim ultimatum. After tense negotiations, the English allowed women, children, and the elderly to surrender, their fate to be decided later. For the warriors who remained, there would be no quarter. English soldiers moved in methodically, hunting them through the muck and reeds, killing all who resisted. The captives, nearly 200 of them, were marched away, their future one of bondage. Sassacus himself, the leader of what was once the most powerful nation in New England, managed to escape the swamp with a small retinue of his most loyal warriors. But his flight was short-lived. He reached Mohawk territory not as a respected leader seeking alliance, but as a fugitive from a new, terrifying power. The Mohawk, in a cold and pragmatic political calculation, chose to align themselves with the victors. Seeking to curry favor with the now dominant English, they assassinated Sassacus and his men. As a grisly token of their new allegiance and a symbol of the war's conclusion, they sent Sassacus's scalp to the colonial leaders in Hartford. The message was unmistakable. With the death of their grand sachem, the leader who had held their confederacy together, all organized Pequot resistance collapsed. The military and political structure of the Pequot Nation was irrevocably broken. The war was officially brought to a close on September 21, 1638, not with a treaty between equals, but with a victor's decree designed for a single purpose: the complete and total erasure of a people. The document, known as the Treaty of Hartford, was an instrument of calculated cultural genocide. Its primary article declared that the Pequot Nation was dissolved, effectively outlawing its political existence. But it went much, much further. The treaty explicitly forbade the survivors from ever again using the name Pequot. Their language, the vessel of their history, songs, and sacred traditions, was banned. To even identify as Pequot was now a crime. It was an attempt to wipe them from memory, to make it as if they had never existed. Under the legal pretense of right of conquest, the treaty seized all Pequot lands for the Connecticut colony, opening up vast, fertile territories for immediate English expansion. The fate of the few hundred survivors was just as grim. They were stripped of their autonomy and divided amongst the English allied tribes, the Mohegan, the Narragansett, and others, as human spoils of war. Hundreds more, including many of the captives from the Great Swamp Fight, faced an even more horrific fate. They were systematically rounded up and sold into the brutal, life-destroying sugar plantation slavery of Bermuda and the West Indies. This act made them the first Native American people to be systematically exported as slaves from the shores of New England, their bodies traded for profit, their lives condemned to hard labor in a foreign land from which there was no return. The consequences of the war immediately and permanently redrew the political and demographic map of New England. With the Pequot, the primary barrier to colonial expansion, removed, English towns and farms surged into the newly seized lands of the Connecticut River Valley. The balance of power among native tribes was shattered. Uncas and his Mohegan tribe, having backed the winning side, were elevated by the English to a position of regional dominance. However, their power was derivative, entirely dependent on the goodwill of their colonial patrons. More ominously, the war and the Mystic Massacre in particular established a terrifying blueprint for future conflicts. The strategy of total war, of deliberately targeting non-combatants to break an enemy's will, of aiming for annihilation rather than subjugation, would become a recurring and brutal feature of American frontier warfare for centuries to come, most notably in the devastating King Philip's War just a generation later. For the next 3 centuries, the official story, the one written by the victors, was that the Pequot were extinct. This was, after all, the explicit goal of the Treaty of Hartford. But the pen stroke of a treaty cannot extinguish the spirit of a people. The attempt at annihilation failed. Despite the unimaginable trauma of the massacre, the loss of their lands, the enslavement of their people, and the outlawing of their very name, the Pequot endured. They survived in the shadows, in small scattered communities, often forced to live among their former rivals. They held on to their identity in secret, refusing to let their memory be erased. In a small but significant acknowledgement of their persistence, a group of so-called Pequots was permitted by the colony in 1651 to resettle on a tiny 500-acre parcel of their former homeland. It was a marginal piece of land, but for a people who were supposed to have vanished, it was a foothold, a place to begin the long, slow process of holding on. That quiet endurance exploded into a remarkable resurgence in the 20th century. The story of their modern rebirth is as dramatic as the story of their near destruction. In 1975, a descendant of the Mystic survivors, named Richard "Skip" Hayward, was elected tribal chairman. He galvanized his people, launching a vigorous strategic campaign to reclaim their identity and their rights. This long legal and political battle reached a triumphant climax in 1983. The Mashantucket Pequot Indian Land Claims Settlement Act, a law signed by President Ronald Reagan, officially granted the tribe federal recognition. It was a momentous reversal, an official declaration by the United States government that the Pequot people did in fact still exist. This federal recognition was the key that unlocked the door to sovereignty and self-determination. It was followed by the establishment of a high-stakes bingo hall, which grew into the monumentally successful Foxwoods Resort Casino in 1992. But the wealth generated was not the end goal. It was the engine for a profound cultural and national renaissance. Today, the Mashantucket Pequot and the Eastern Pequot Tribal Nation are vibrant, sovereign communities. They have wisely used their new economic resources to reverse the legacy of the past. They have built schools and healthcare facilities. They have established a world-class museum and research center, a magnificent institution dedicated to telling their own story, from their own perspective, for the entire world to see. Most powerfully, they are actively reviving the Pequot language, directly defying the 350-year-old decree that sought to silence it forever, and ensuring that the story of their ancestors, a story of unimaginable horror, quiet endurance, and ultimate survival, is never forgotten. The story of the Pequot is a powerful testament to survival, but it is just one of many from this foundational period. To learn more about the complex and often brutal encounters that shaped the nation, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell. See you in the next video.